I pulled my baby sister's body from the pool while my mother slept 10 feet away. 2 years later, I watched my little brother zipped into a black bag because she forgot his pills. The night I told her, "You get nothing. Not my money. Not my life. Not even my pity." She smiled, like she still owned me. So I decided to take back everything she ever thought was hers. My name is Marcus Reed. I am 32 years old. I am the one who lived it, the one who watched, the one who took careful notes until the pages felt heavy with evidence. This is my story. If you had driven by our house back then, you would have thought we were normal. Paint peeling, yes, but the kind of peeling people call character. A swing set missing one chain. A dog that barked at the mailman and sometimes at nothing. Inside, the air felt heavy, as if the house itself held its breath and waited for someone to exhale first. The floors had a memory of footsteps, and the walls carried soft dents where doors had met them a little too hard. In the mornings, the kitchen smelled like stale coffee and damp bread, and by afternoon the same rooms turned hot and slow, like time itself got tired around us. My mother could charm anyone for 10 minutes. After that, the cracks showed. She had 4 kids, technically, 2 with my dad, 2 with her second husband. Mark, my younger brother by 2 years, was the golden boy. Alicia and Sam, the babies from her next marriage, were ornaments. And me, I was the mistake she tried to erase by pretending I was not there. There is a kind of silence that is louder than yelling, a quiet that tells you what you are worth, and I learned to read it before I learned algebra. That I used to think I did something wrong in the womb. Grandpa would say, "Some people just should not be parents, son." I did not understand that until I was old enough to see how she looked at us, like we were chores she forgot to finish. The look was distant and annoyed at the same time, as if we were a spill someone else should have cleaned up already. When I was 11, a full bookshelf toppled onto me. Hardcovers, encyclopedias, the weight of someone else's knowledge pressed into my chest. I lay under it for 3 long minutes before anyone noticed. Stepdad finally came in and muttered, "Quit making noise." Mom did not look up from her phone. Grandma pulled me out, crying harder than I did, checking my arms for splinters and my scalp for blood, whispering little prayers that sounded like apologies. That was the day I started watching instead of asking. I learned that questions got you nothing, but attention to detail might save you later. When you watch long enough, you learn timing. Timing keeps you fed. Timing keeps you safe. Timing becomes the rhythm that turns fear into a plan. I did not have a plan yet, but I learned how to breathe when the room got small and how to step sideways when a hand moved too fast at a T13. I was old enough to have opinions, and apparently that meant I was old enough to be hit for them. Stepdad had a rule: question me once, learn your lesson twice. Sometimes it was a belt, sometimes a backhand. The bruises faded, the silence did not. Mom's eyes followed the hits, not to stop them, but to make sure he did not break anything she would have to explain. Afterward, she would ask if we wanted ice cream, like sugar could erase purple marks or turn a lesson into a treat. The summer Alicia drowned was the first time I understood what neglect costs. The air was humid, the kind of heat that makes your skin stick to the furniture and your thoughts move slow. Stepdad was gaming in the living room, the volume too loud. Mom was sleeping off a late night with baby Sam. Mark and I were watching cartoons until I realized it was too quiet. No toddler babble, no splashing from her plastic toys outside, only the hum of the air conditioner and the rattle in the vent. "Where's Alicia?" I asked. Mark froze with cereal halfway to his mouth. We checked the playroom. Empty. The yard. Empty. The garage. Empty. It took 3 whole minutes before Mom stumbled out, hair wild, shouting Alicia's name like the sound could pull her out of hiding. I remember the scream before the sight, the sound a person makes when denial shatters. Mom's voice sliced the heat. "Oh my God, Alicia." Alicia lay on the deck, water dripping from her curls, lips a frightening blue, like frostbite in July. Stepdad tried CPR, his arms shaking and his eyes darting from the clock to the door. Dad was visiting that weekend. He ran out from the kitchen and burned his hand on the stove in the chaos. Sirens arrived. Neighbors stared with that mix of pity and curiosity that always shows up for other people's worst day. By nightfall, a doctor whispered what we already knew. Alicia was gone. Mark and I sat on the porch swing until dawn. The wood creaked like a metronome for our guilt, back and forth, an ache that kept time. Grandma wrapped us in blankets and said, "This is not your fault. But children do not understand the transfer of blame, so we wore that night like a tattoo. It did not fade. It just settled into the skin. A week later, CPS came, asking soft questions with careful faces. Mom played the grieving mother perfectly, tears in the right places, trembling hands, a script she had rehearsed her whole life. Dad filed for custody. He said the words unfit mother like they could exorcise her. For a while, it worked. Mark and I lived with him, went to school on time, ate real dinners that came with napkins and seconds. Then Grandma, out of love or guilt, petitioned for us to go back. Your mother deserves another chance, she said, which is a sentence courts love more than they love the truth. So we went back, and the second chance came with rules. Keep quiet, stay useful, never forget who you belong to. Mark was 15 when he died. He got into a fight at school, a busted finger, a prescription bottle, a doctor's warning. Mom was supposed to monitor the pills. She did not. I came home from school and found Grandpa sitting on the porch, crying into his hands. He looked up at me with hollow eyes and said, "They are taking him out now." 2 paramedics rolled a stretcher down the hall, black bag zipped tight. The smell of antiseptic and loss hit me before the sight did. My brain refused to name what I was seeing. I remember whispering, "No, that is not him. He is upstairs." Grandpa pulled me close until my ribs hurt and my breath finally remembered how to move. Mom screamed for cameras and neighbors again and blamed bad doctors, as if attention could trade places with accountability. At the funeral, she wore white, as if the color could declare innocence. Her eulogy made strangers cry and made me want to tear the podium down. Every sentence started with I. Afterward, I found her behind the church, smoking, complaining about how expensive kids are. That was the day I started writing everything down. Not a diary, a record. Because one day she would need to remember exactly what she had done, and I would hand her the pages. Grief ages you in dog years. At 18, I felt 40. I moved in with my grandparents, graduated high school by muscle memory, and learned that surviving and living are not the same task. Mom came around only when she needed something signed. Grandpa kept saying, "You are a good man. Do not let hate eat you." But hate was the only thing that tasted like fuel. When Mom limped through the door, a back injury from a fall at work, I hid her pain meds like a scavenger. Childish, maybe, but each missing pill was a whisper to Mark I did not forget. She got caught driving on those meds, crashed her car, landed 6 months in county. I laughed for the first time in years. It was not joy. It was relief, a muscle finally unclenching. Grandma called it sad. I called it symmetry. When Mom came back, she had nothing but excuses. She tried to act reformed, offered to cook, talked about church, pretended she had been born again instead of bailed out. I had already moved my things into her old bedroom. She got the couch, the one with the metal bar that pressed into your spine. Every morning she stood up with a groan, and I sipped coffee, met her eyes for just a second, let her see the satisfaction I did not bother to hide. Some nights she muttered in her sleep, half pleading, half accusing, "You were supposed to help me." I stared at the ceiling fan and thought about how she never said that to the kids who needed her most. Grandpa was the only man I ever called hero. When he died, the world tilted again. At the funeral, Mom cried harder than anyone. Grief is performance art, tears as currency. Afterwards, she asked me, "When Mom is gone, you will take care of me, right?" Her tone was casual, like asking someone to pick up milk. That was it. The switch flipped. All those years of planning, without a plan, snapped into focus. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You get nothing." Grandma gasped. Mom blinked, waiting for a punchline that did not come. She tried to laugh it off, then to guilt me, then to shout. I did not move. I let her see the man she made, the one who learned patience from pain. That is where the revenge truly began, not with fire, but with a sentence and a calm breath that felt like the first clean inhale in years. The morning after I told her she would get nothing, the house felt different. The quiet had a surface to it, as if someone had wiped a fogged mirror clean. Grandma made eggs the way she always did, a little too firm, a lot of love. My mother sat at the table and scrolled her phone like it was a mask she did not know how to remove. I poured coffee and felt a steadiness I had not felt since childhood, the kind of calm that lets you hear the clock again. Politeness became the costume we both wore. I would say good morning. She would answer, "Morning," and the word would fall like a coin that did not buy anything. Grandma kept the air breathable with small talk about the neighbor's new fence or the weather that could not make up its mind. My mother kept trying angles. First came sympathy. "My back is killing me," she said, rubbing a spot as if pain were a key that opened every door. "You should stretch more," I said, and I said it kindly, because kindness with boundaries is not cruelty. Then came guilt. "You used to love me when you were little. I used to believe you deserved it," I said. The words hit her like steps she had forgotten were there. I did not feel triumph. I felt balance. The pill routine turned into a game she thought she could win. Doctors wrote prescriptions. She lined up plastic bottles like trophies. She nodded off in the middle of sentences, cheeks slack, a little drool at the corner of her mouth. I caught her once at midnight in Grandma's bathroom, tugging the mirror cabinet open with a smile that looked rehearsed. Looking for my pain meds, she said. "Those are multivitamins," I said. She laughed, a thin sound, and closed the mirror on her own reflection. After that, I began the small revenges that were really protections. A few pills went missing each time a bottle arrived. I did not take them. I hid them. The attic, the hollow of the fake ficus, the zippered pocket in the winter coat that no one wore. I was not trying to push her over a cliff. I was trying to make the ground feel real. She tore the house apart for hours on those days, knuckles raw from rummaging, accusing the air. "Who is touching my things?" "Maybe you forgot where you put them," I said, and the evenness in my voice bothered her more than the missing pills. Sleeping on the couch became a ritual reminder that the past had consequences. Her old room was mine. The walls were repainted. My desk held Mark's glove where I could see it. My bed held the first good sleep I had known in years. She got the couch with the metal bar that pressed a thin ache into your spine right where you cannot ignore it. Every morning she stood up with a long groan that sounded like a performance for an invisible audience. I stirred my coffee and watched the steam turn into nothing. Once Grandma whispered that we could get a mattress topper. I thought of Mark and the lid that closed over his face. Did Mark get a topper in his coffin? I asked. We did not speak about mattresses again. People in the neighborhood had eyes. They had seen the ambulances and the police and the boy who mowed lawns too young. When my mother tried to tell them how cruel I was, the story slid off and landed on the sidewalk like wet paper. In church, she waited for a pastor to ask for an update. He did not. Conversations ended quicker. Invitations did not arrive. Isolation makes people frantic. Frantic people trip over their own plans. Grandpa's absence changed the gravity of every room. He had been the voice that could name the weather inside a person. When he died, the last rope snapped. There was a little money, not enough to fix anyone, but enough to draw out the worst in someone who felt owed. While we sorted documents, she hovered near the file cabinet with a smile that did not belong to grief. Looking for something, I asked. Just making sure the insurance is in order, she said, like she was helpful, like she was careful. It is handled, I said. Her jaw tightened. I am his daughter, she snapped. And I am the son he trusted, I said. The slap came out of her like muscle memory. It stung. It also clarified. I smiled. You just made this easier. Her eyes widened, not because I would hit back, but because she knew Grandma had seen it. That night she tried an apology. I lost control, she said. Alicia did too when she slipped into the pool, I said. My mother cried herself to sleep, the couch bar pressing a straight line across a back that had never carried us. 3 months later, she found the same road to the same jail. Doctor shopping. Pills that did not belong to her. A steering wheel she should not have touched. When the police asked questions at our door, I stood just inside and listened. The officer said she was lucky no one died. Grandma sat at the table with her hands covering her face and whispered that she could not keep doing this. You will not have to, I said, and meant it. While my mother sat in county, I went through her storage boxes. I found old outfits that tried to fake youth, expired coupons, a scatter of necklaces that left green lines on your skin. Mostly trash. One photograph stopped me. It was her with Mark, before the world taught us sharpness. His smile was the real kind, the kind that lifts the cheeks and softens the eyes. I taped the photo inside my closet, not out of love for her, out of duty to him. She came back thinner, paler, quieter. Jail had not taught humility. It had taught new vocabulary for excuses. I am in therapy now. I am changing. I will make amends. At midnight, she still whispered on the phone in the laundry room. She still borrowed money she did not pay back. She still tried new people who did not yet know her. I overheard her tell Grandma that if she could just get a little more of Dad's estate, she could start over. "You mean Grandpa's?" I said from the doorway. "The one you already emptied." She told me I did not talk to her that way. I reminded her that I was the only one left who talked to her at all. Rumors began to arrive the way leaves blow in, slow at first, then all at once. An old friend from rehab showed up at our door and scratched his arm the way nerves scratch. He asked if she was using again. "Not here," I said. He nodded and warned me she was looking for something stronger. That night, I sent an anonymous tip to the local police. Not a dramatic letter, just a few plain lines and an address. Weeks passed with nothing. Then 2 officers came by and asked careful questions and left with a small bag of pills she had hidden badly. No arrest that night. Just a new clarity in her eyes when she looked at me. "You think you are better than me?" she hissed. "No," I said. "I am exactly what you taught me not to be. By 25, I had a life she did not belong to. A job that liked my steadiness. Friends who did not know me by the worst stories. A girlfriend who spoke softly when the world got loud. My mother could not stand that distance. She called during dinner to say she was lonely. She showed up at my work and made scenes that turned heads. 'I am your mother,' she shouted when security asked her to leave. My manager stepped outside and asked if I was all right. 'Yes,' I said. I am pruning the family tree. Childish tricks had served their purpose. Now I needed structure. I did not want to bruise her. I wanted to remove the places where she could sink her hooks. Paperwork is not romantic, but paper is a hard surface to slip off. At night, I spread folders across the table and turned our history into an index. County records, CPS reports, charges that had faded from memory but not from ink. I used tabs and labels like I was building scaffolding around a crumbling building. In one folder, I placed the drowning. In another, the overdose that should have been prevented by any adult who was awake. In others, I placed the arrests, the forged signatures, the dates we tried and the dates we failed. My girlfriend watched me work and said I was building a case. A cage, I said. A legal one. Grandma began to slip in that gentle way that makes you want to scream at time for being so casual. Bills went unpaid. Stove knobs were left on. My mother made soft sounds about helping. "She needs me to handle the money," she said to relatives who still took her calls. What she meant was she needed access. I sat with Grandma at the dining table and explained a simple plan. We would bring in a financial advisor. The advisor would be boring and honest. We would make a living trust. 2 signatures required for anything larger than a few groceries. Grandma nodded and signed, trusting me because I had never taken from her. When my mother learned about the trust, she tried to peel it apart with the same tools she used on people. She called banks and said the documents were fake. She threatened to sue people who were not afraid of paper. She told anyone who listened that I stole from my own family. I kept receipts. I kept call logs. I kept copies of every letter and sent them to the attorney who now knew us by first names. "Let her dig," I told him. "She will find herself. Patience is a skill you can grow the way you grow a garden." For months, I let her spin. She showed up at Grandma's door with flowers that smelled like apology. Grandma opened the door only halfway. I stood a few steps behind and did nothing except exist like a locked door. When my mother tried to whisper that I only wanted money, I brought out the ledger and the binder and the neat stack of invoices. "Here is every penny," I said. "Here is every pill. Here is every appointment. Truth is a disinfectant. It stings when it touches lies." When Grandma's memory slipped further, I took the next step that love requires. I filed for guardianship. The hearing was small. A judge, 2 lawyers, family. My mother wore a floral blouse and cried in the right places. She told the judge I was controlling and vindictive. I slid a binder across the table. Inside was 20 years of what we had survived. The judge read only a little before he looked at me and then at her. "I have seen enough," he said. "Guardianship granted. Financial and medical decisions supervised. Family access suspended until further review." My mother gasped like air had betrayed her. "You cannot cut me out of her life," she said. The judge told her that she had done that herself. The gavel sounded soft, and still it felt like thunder in my chest. For the first time in a long time, Grandma was safe. The bills were paid. The meds were correct. The refrigerator held food that would be eaten by someone who cared. My mother tried one more angle that had always worked for her. She went to the retirement home without calling, flowers in hand, and a story on her tongue. I had already briefed the staff. Security met her at the door and explained that visits needed appointments approved by me. She argued. She pleaded. She even pretended to faint in the lobby, a little theater for a crowd that did not clap. Policies do not respond to tears. A nurse called me later to say my mother had left a note for Grandma. It said that I was poisoning her against her daughter. Projection, I said, written in the same hand that had signed permission slips without ever showing up. I hung up and felt something I had not allowed myself to feel. Not triumph. Not revenge. A quiet relief that did not need celebration. The cage I built had air holes. It did not have doors that opened inward. That my mother still had one weapon left, her story. She began to tell it to anyone who would give her 3 minutes of attention. In her version, she was the victim, the misunderstood parent with a cruel child who had stolen her mother's affection. I decided not to argue. I decided to document. I spent an entire weekend printing every record and arranging them by year. The stack of paper was as thick as my forearm. I mailed copies, plain brown envelopes, to the few relatives who still took her calls. No notes, no insults, just dates and signatures. Within a week the phone went quiet. A cousin called and said, "We didn't know." I told her, "Now you do?" After that, the silence became permanent. My mother's reputation had been overdrafted for years. Now the account finally closed. Months passed, and she tried one last time to reclaim control. She came to my workplace parking lot leaning on a cane she did not need. Her face looked smaller, her cheeks fallen in. "Please," she said, "I just want to talk." "Talk about what?" I asked. "About us," she whispered. "There is no us," I told her. "You are simply the woman who had children and forgot to raise them." She cried without sound, like air leaking out of a tire. I walked away. That night, I lit a candle for Mark and Alicia. It flickered against the kitchen tiles and threw soft light on the folder of papers that had finally become our shield. I told them it was almost over. The months after that were quiet in a strange way. I woke up, went to work, came home, checked on Grandma. The world became ordinary again. I learned that peace can feel suspicious when you have lived too long in chaos. I kept waiting for the next call, the next stunt, the next plea. Instead, I heard stories from others, that she was couch surfing with old friends, that she showed up at recovery meetings just to borrow money, that she slept in a car behind the diner for a while. People said she looked like a ghost rehearsing human gestures. Grandma and I stopped speaking her name. Some names call storms. Then, one evening in late summer, 3 soft knocks came at the door. I opened it thinking it was a delivery. She stood there, thin, colorless, eyes unfocused. "Can I come in?" she asked. I leaned against the frame and said nothing. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said. "I warned you that would happen." "You can't mean that. I'm your mother." "You were," I said. Past tense. Grandma's voice floated from the kitchen. "Maybe she can stay." "No," I said, sharp enough that both of them went still. My mother's expression changed the way weather changes. One breath of sadness, then thunder. "You think you're better than me." "I don't think." I told her I know. I closed the door. The latch clicked and sounded like punctuation at the end of a long book. She did not stop. She sent letters, each one beginning with blame and ending with promises. She called the nursing home pretending to be a social worker. She posted online about her cruel son. I filed a notice with the home that all contact required my consent. Then I changed my number. Every wire that once carried her voice into my life went dead. It was not hatred. It was sanitation. Some wounds heal only when you stop touching them. A few months later, an envelope arrived from a lawyer I did not know. Inside was her petition to contest Grandma's estate. The handwriting was shaky, the accusations predictable: undue influence, manipulation, control. I almost laughed. The hearing was on a gray Tuesday. She arrived in borrowed clothes that did not fit her shoulders. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. When my turn came, I handed the judge a binder. Inside was every record, every date, every bruise that paper could hold. He read in silence for 5 minutes, then closed it gently and said, "Petition denied." The gavel's tap was soft but final. My mother stood frozen while her lawyer gathered papers. I walked past her and whispered, "You should have been better." After that, she vanished again. The world has a way of forgetting people who have burned all their bridges and then tried to sell the ashes. Weeks went by, then months. Grandma began to breathe easier. We planted tomatoes. She told stories about Grandpa and laughed in the middle of them instead of crying. I caught myself smiling without guilt for the first time in years. The house smelled like food again. When the time came to move Grandma into assisted living, she looked relieved. The place had sunlight in every room, nurses who sang under their breath, and windows that opened without sticking. We packed slowly. She handed me her wedding ring and said, "Keep this safe." I wore it on a chain around my neck. At the new place, she settled in like a plant finally getting the right light. I visited twice a week. We played cards, talked about shows, remembered the good parts of the past. The bad parts grew distant. The way nightmares dissolve after breakfast. One afternoon, a nurse came to find me in the recreation room. "There's a woman outside asking for you," she whispered. I did not need to ask who. I stepped into the courtyard. My mother sat on a bench holding a bunch of wilted flowers. She looked up and smiled, weak and shaking. "I heard Grandma's not doing well," she said. "She's fine," I answered. "I just want to see her," she pleaded. "Please. I miss her." The words landed like dull pebbles. She had learned the shape of apology, but not the substance. She trembled, shoulders drawn in, a small figure under a large sky. For a brief second, pity flickered, but pity is a door I have learned not to open. "She doesn't need to see you," I said. "You don't need to keep pretending." Her face folded in on itself. "I'm still your mother." "You were," I said quietly. "You stopped earning that title." She began to cry, large uneven sobs that bent her over. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. "Anywhere I'm not," I said, and walked away. The gate closed behind me with a clean metallic sound that carried all the weight of 30 years. Rumors drifted back in small fragments. Someone saw her near the shelter downtown. Someone else said she was arrested again for forging prescriptions. Eventually, there were no more reports. Silence spread over her name like snow. Maybe that was justice. Not flames or vengeance, but the simple erasure of her noise. In the vacuum she left, peace grew roots. Grandma joined the knitting group, then the choir. When I visited, she would squeeze my hand and say, "You saved us." I would answer, "No, Grandma. I just stopped her that 18 night." I sometimes woke up to echoes that memory plays when it is bored. Mark's laugh, Alicia's small splash, the heavy silence that followed. I spoke to them quietly. "I kept my promise," I said. "She can't hurt anyone now." People talk about closure as if it is a door that seals itself. It is not. Closure is a myth told to make endings sound clean. What I have is quiet, and quiet is enough that I still wondered if I went too far or not far enough. But then I remembered forgiveness is for those who repent. She never did. So I built peace instead of forgiveness. My girlfriend and I moved out of state. We bought a small house near a lake where mornings are gold and the air smells like pine and wet earth. I sit on the dock sometimes and let the sunlight touch my face. It feels like something new, something that does not have her fingerprints on it. A year later, a letter came without a return address. Inside, one line written in her shaky hand, "I forgive you." I watched the words curl in the heat of the lighter until the paper turned black. Forgiveness from her was just another leash. That night, I dreamed of Mark running across the yard, Alicia safe in the pool, everyone laughing in light that never fades. I woke up knowing revenge was never about punishing her. It was about protecting them, keeping their memory clean. 2 years later, a call came from a county office. A woman had been found in a motel room. Overdose, no identification, only a note with my name. It took 3 days before I called back. When I confirmed who she was, the officer asked if I wanted to claim the body. "No," I said. "She's not mine anymore." "Any next of kin?" he asked. None who would answer. When I hung up, I felt nothing but stillness. That evening, I walked to the lake. The sky burned orange and red, the colors that once meant danger, now meaning rest. I whispered to the wind, "It's over," and for the first time I believed myself. Grandma passed peacefully a year later. I sat by her bed and held her hand until the monitors went still. "You were the best part of us," I said. She smiled faintly, murmured, "You kept your promise," and slipped away. I spread her ashes at the lake. The photo of Mark and Alicia floated on the water, drifting outward until it was only a reflection of sunlight. No tears came, only gratitude. Because revenge ended where peace began. Sometimes, when I tell this story, people expect fireworks or regret. There were none. There was only the slow building of boundaries, the steady rhythm of breathing without fear. Justice was quiet, patient, and administrative. A pile of documents, a few signatures, the silence of a phone that never rings. That is what freedom sounds like. I no longer dream of shouting. I dream of calm mornings, coffee steaming, birds talking about nothing important. If anyone asks what revenge feels like, I tell them it feels like that. The moment you realize the fire stopped spreading and you can finally stand still. If you are hearing this and you were broken by someone who should have protected you, know this. You can heal, you can rebuild, you can take your story back. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is the whisper of a door closing, the stillness after years of chaos, the small breath that finally says, I am free, because sometimes the only real revenge is peace. After Grandma's funeral, life began to fold back into a rhythm that did not include grief as a daily visitor. I sold the old house, packed our history into boxes that smelled of cedar and dust, and drove everything that mattered to the lake. The first night there, I sat on the porch and listened to crickets echoing through the trees. The stillness felt almost too large. I kept expecting some kind of noise, a knock, a voice from the past, but there was only the hum of summer air. I realized then that silence is not emptiness. It is space reclaimed. It is what remains when chaos finally exhausts itself. The mornings became slower. I would wake before the sun and walk down to the dock, coffee mug warm in my hands, watching the mist lift off the water. Sometimes I spoke out loud to no one in particular. I told Mark and Alicia about the herons that landed on the posts, about how the lake changed color with the sky, about how the world kept going even when the story felt finished. The words disappeared into the fog, but somehow I knew they were heard. That I took a job repairing old radios and turntables in a nearby town. It was simple work, the kind that teaches you to listen for static and to fix it gently. When people dropped off their machines, they often told stories about the songs those radios once played. I nodded, smiled, and found comfort in the hum of circuits behaving as they should. The quiet hours between customers gave me space to breathe, to think, to feel the difference between noise and sound. Noise is chaos. Sound is intention. Some evenings my girlfriend and I would cook dinner with the windows open, the smell of garlic and rain mixing in the air. We did not talk about my mother much. She became a background hum, a faint echo of a song you once heard too many times. Every now and then I would catch myself wondering if she ever thought of us, but I learned not to chase the thought. Thinking about her was like turning on a light in an abandoned house. It only showed the dust. Better to keep the lights off and let the quiet stay whole. One autumn morning, a letter arrived addressed in careful handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper from a lawyer. It was a notice of unclaimed remains. The woman from the motel had been cremated after 30 days. If no family member responded, the ashes would be placed in a communal grave at the edge of the county. For a long time I stared at that letter. There was no anger left, no triumph. Only a faint ache that people could vanish so completely that even the earth had to share a space for them. I folded the letter and placed it in the same folder that held my records. Not to honor her, but to complete the archive. Every story needs an ending, even the ones that never deserved a beginning. Winter came early that year. The lake froze at the edges and the world went still again. One night, while closing the shop, I saw a mother and her 2 children walking under the streetlights, their laughter bouncing off the snow. The sound was so pure it hurt. I thought about how small choices build or destroy entire worlds. A cup of spilled pills, a nap beside a pool, a slap that teaches silence instead of safety. It doesn't take much to shape a lifetime. I promised myself again that the chain ended with me. There would be no next chapter written in bruises. On the anniversary of Grandma's death, I took the ring from around my neck and held it up to the sky. The metal caught the light and threw a small sunbeam across the water. "You were the best part of us," I said softly. The wind pushed at the reeds like an answer. I let the ring fall into the lake. It disappeared with barely a ripple, as if the water understood the ceremony better than I did. For the first time, the past felt not just over but forgiven. Not forgiveness for her, but for me. For the years I spent carrying her ghost like proof. The following spring I received an invitation to speak at a local youth program. The coordinator had heard parts of my story from someone who knew my girlfriend. They wanted me to talk about surviving toxic families. I almost said no. But that night I dreamed of the bookshelf falling, the water, the black bag, the couch, and then the lake. When I woke up, I realized telling the story was not reopening wounds. It was pointing to where they had closed. So I agreed. The day of the talk, The room smelled of markers and floor polish. Teenagers sat in folding chairs, some bored, some curious. I told them my name and my age and the short version of the long story. I told them that monsters can look like mothers and fathers, that survival sometimes looks like defiance. I told them that revenge is not about hurting someone else. It's about taking your power back piece by piece until there's nothing left to steal. When I finished, no one clapped at first. Then a single girl in the front row, maybe 16, raised her hand and said, "It's hard to believe peace is real." I smiled and said, "It is, but you have to build it yourself." After that day, I began to write more. Not records this time, but reflections. Little essays on quiet, on boundaries, on how the world looks when you stop expecting apologies. Writing became its own kind of therapy. The sentences came slow, patient, the way calm breathes after panic. Sometimes I would stop mid-line and listen to the lake wind outside and feel the world hum in the same key as my chest. It felt like living again. Years passed quietly. Seasons stacked on each other like layers of music, soft, repeating, never loud. I planted a tree near the water for each person I lost. A willow for Mark, bending but unbroken. A birch for Alicia, white and bright against the darker trunks. And for Grandma, a sturdy oak whose roots reached deep into the soil. Every spring they bloomed together, a small forest of memory that belonged only to us. One evening, as I watched the sunset bleed into the lake, my girlfriend, now my wife, came to sit beside me. She asked if I ever thought about my mother anymore. I told her the truth. Sometimes, I said, but not in anger. More like remembering a storm you once lived through, knowing it can't touch you now. She nodded, leaned her head on my shoulder, and we stayed there until the sky went dark. Later that night, before bed, I looked at the reflection of the moon on the water and realized something simple. I had spent half my life preparing for a final battle that ended not in war, but in silence. Revenge had started as fire and ended as still water. And maybe that was what growing up really meant. Learning that peace is not something that arrives when justice does. Peace is what you create when you stop feeding the past. If you're listening now, if this story has found you somewhere in your own quiet, know this. The world will try to convince you that pain makes you wise and forgiveness makes you whole. But sometimes wisdom is just knowing when to step away, and wholeness is what's left when the noise finally stops. You do not have to burn your history to escape it. You only have to stop living inside it. I took one last deep breath that night and felt the air move all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. It was clean. It was enough. The lake outside shimmered under the moon, and I whispered one final time into the dark. I kept my promise. Then I turned off the light. Spring turned to a long, bright summer, and the lake settled into a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. On most mornings, I walked the narrow path that circled the water, boots brushing dew off the grass, coffee warming my hands, mind quiet. I learned the names of birds because they showed up like neighbors. Heron on the pilings, kingfisher diving with a small arrow of splash, a pair of geese that argued like an old couple and then drifted side by side again. The world kept offering small lessons in patience. I kept saying yes to them. Work stayed steady. People brought me radios that had sat in closets for decades. They told me this one played on the day they got married. Or this one was the only thing that kept a man awake on overnight shifts. Or this one was the sound of a childhood kitchen where someone kind stirred soup and hummed. I listened to the stories, then I listened to the machines. A soft crackle here, a loose belt there, dust that dulled the music. I cleaned, soldered, tuned, and watched faces light when the sound returned. There is a kind of repair that feels like apology made solid. Not for her, for the world, for myself, for all the mornings that used to taste like panic. On weekends, my wife and I drove to the farmer's market in town. We bought tomatoes that still smelled like vines, corn with silk that stuck to our fingers, peaches that bled juice down the wrist if you forgot to lean forward. We learned the names of the people who grew our food. They learned to save us the good eggs. At a stand near the end, a woman sold hand-woven baskets. She taught me how to see the weave lines that kept shape, how tension and slack made the difference between something that would hold and something that would slump. I thought about boundaries while she talked, about how a life is a basket you keep shaping. Pull here, loosen there. Do not let the bottom sag. Letters still arrived sometimes. Not from her, from people who heard me speak and wanted to tell me their story. A boy who slept in a car with his sister while his mother disappeared for days. A woman who hid her own medicine so she would not become her parent. A man who forgave too early, then learned he could forgive himself later for closing the door a second time. I wrote back when I could. I told them what I wish someone had told me at 13. You did not cause this. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to ask for quiet, and then keep it. The trees I planted grew. The willow that stands for Mark sent long branches toward the water and learned to bend without breaking. The birch that stands for Alicia lifted white skin against the darker trunks and flashed in the wind like laughter. The oak for Grandma anchored itself and dared storms to try. Some evenings I sat between them and read old paperbacks I found at yard sales. I underlined small sentences that felt true, not the big famous lines but the quiet ones that hide in the middle of a page. I kept a notebook of those lines and sometimes I read them out loud, just to hear what the world sounded like when it agreed with you. The past nudged sometimes. A smell could do it. Chlorine from a neighbor's pool on a hot day. The rip of packing tape that sounds too much like a zipper pulled over something that should be breathing. The sound of a belt sliding through loops in a department store. On those days I walked a little longer, or I let the heron teach me stillness, or I took apart a radio and put it back together and reminded my hands that they know how to finish what they start. Trauma likes to claim it invented you. Patience reminds it that it did not. One afternoon the youth program asked if I would sit with a small group instead of speaking from a stage. We circled chairs in a room that smelled like pencil shavings. No microphone, no slides, just faces and the sound of a clock. A boy with a hoodie pulled tight told me his mother called him at school to say the rent was due, then screamed when he said he did not have it. A girl with chipped nail polish said her father would be nice for weeks, and then turn mean in one sentence. I told them what my record book taught me. Keep dates. Keep names. Keep the little details. Not because courts will always care, but because you will. Memory slips when it gets tired. Paper does not. They nodded like they were storing the words in places that would stay dried out. I kept the promise to avoid her name. But a person can be absent and still feel near when you pass the old streets. Once, while driving through the city for a part one needed, I turned down the avenue that used to lead to the house with peeling paint. The swing set was gone. The fence had been replaced. A dog still barked at nothing, or maybe at me. I stopped at the corner for 1 minute and let the air show me what it remembered. Then I turned the wheel and went home the long way. As if distance could complete a thought, the letter about her ashes stayed in the file. And some nights I took it out and read it the way you read a weather report. Information, not instruction. I thought briefly about claiming them and placing them somewhere small and unremarkable. Then I remembered the power of not being the next person to fix what another person broke. I slid the letter back, closed the drawer, and went to bed. We owe the dead respect when they respected the living. We owe ourselves peace either way. When autumn came again, the youth program asked if I would mentor a single student. I met with him at the library, a quiet boy with careful eyes and a backpack that held everything he owned. We did homework. We filled out forms. We talked about how to tell truth without being cruel, and how to be kind without being a doormat. He asked me once if I was angry with my mother. I told him the truth. Anger is a match. It burns bright, then it burns you. I used it to light a candle. Then I learned to sit in the glow and let the heat die down. We went fishing once on a Saturday when the sun was soft. He had never held a rod. I showed him how to flick the wrist and how to wait without staring too hard at the line. Fish bite when you are not thinking about them. Patience works better when it is not trying to impress anyone. We did not catch much. We laughed anyway. On the way back, he asked if I ever wished for a different life. I said I wished for a better past when I was young, but now I only wish for a good morning and a quiet night. Those are wishes I can help grant. My wife and I talked about children. We did not rush. We wanted to build something strong enough to hold small weight without bending. We went to counseling even though nothing was broken, because prevention is kinder than repair. The counselor asked me to list what love must never do in our house. I wrote it carefully. Love must never require silence. Love must never confuse fear with respect. Love must never hide apologies and gifts. Love must never teach a child to make themselves smaller to fit inside an adult's comfort. We pinned that list to the refrigerator like a recipe. Sometimes I imagined a conversation with the version of me who sat on a porch swing after Alicia died. I would tell him that the pain will not swallow you even when it feels like you are breathing water. I would tell him that you will learn the difference between performance and care, that you will sit by a lake one day and feel the absence of panic like a gift, that you will say the word peace and mean it. I would tell him that a sentence can save you. Not a poem, not a speech, just a sentence you repeat until your bones believe it. You get nothing. The words that closed a door also opened a life. The youth program gave me a small stipend for mentoring, and I used it to buy secondhand radios that nobody wanted to fix. I took them apart on weekends with the boy from the library and taught him what each piece did. He taught me memes and slang that made me feel older than I am. We laughed. He asked me once what revenge felt like now, years later. I answered without thinking. Revenge feels like coming home and finding everything where you left it. It feels like dinner that is not interrupted by a siren. It feels like never having to decide between saving someone else and saving yourself. Winter returned, and the lake skinned over with ice. The willow bowed lower and touched its own reflection. The birch stood bright even under gray skies. The oak held every inch of snow without complaint. On the coldest night of the year, I stood on the porch and watched my breath like a small cloud. I thought of the judge who said he had seen enough. I thought of the nurse who called me sir and said we have it handled. I thought of all the people who stepped into the space that used to be chaos and filled it with function. There is a village on the other side of survival. It is built by clerks and nurses and case workers and friends who answer texts. It is not dramatic. It is real. One more letter came in spring, a simple postcard from the county that said a communal stone had been placed with the names of the unclaimed. I sat with that sentence for a long time. I imagined a field with markers that stood for people who ran out of chances or ran out of hands to hold them. I felt grief for the idea of it, not for her, more for the math of loss in the world. Then, I set the card down and went outside and watered the 3 trees. The leaves shook like applause when the hose spray hit them. I laughed at the sound. The world keeps making new music if you let it. On the anniversary of Alicia's death, I did not visit a grave. I made pancakes and burned the first one the way Grandpa used to. I told my wife the story of his old jokes and how he could make sadness nod off for an hour just by telling you that he saw a robin that morning and it looked like hope with wings. We walked to the water after breakfast. I said her name out loud. Alicia. It felt gentle in the mouth. That was enough. When the boy from the library graduated, he wore a borrowed tie and shoes that squeaked. He waved at me from a row of caps and gowns. Later, he hugged me with the careful strength of someone who understands how not to break another person. He said thank you without adding for what, and I answered you are welcome without adding for being yourself. He left for a job in another city. I drove home in a quiet car and felt full that I slept well that night. No echoes, no old alarms going off in my chest. Just the slow rise and fall of breath that finally belonged to me. If I dreamed, I do not remember. Morning arrived like a friend. The trees made the sound of a soft wave in a place with no ocean. The house held only the things we chose to keep. I stood at the kitchen window and watched sunlight move across the table. I thought, this is what a reclaimed life looks like. It does not ask permission. It does not apologize for being simple. It just is, steady and warm, a room where nobody is afraid. Spring folded into another year. The lake kept its habit of greeting dawn before the sun cleared the trees. I learned to measure time not in months, but in small things. How far the willow's branches reached, how quickly the birch bark peeled, when the first frogs began to sing. Each cycle of seasons reminded me that growth does not hurry. It simply happens if you give it light and quiet. Work at the repair shop grew busier. A new generation of customers found comfort in the hum of the old machines. I trained 2 apprentices from the local trade school. They were young, patient, still soft at the edges. I told them that fixing things was mostly about listening. You wait. You hear what is wrong. You move gently. It is not so different from healing. They laughed, but I could see they understood. My wife began teaching art at the community center. In the evenings, she came home with paint on her arms and stories about children who used color the way I use silence. Sometimes she brought her students to the lake to sketch the trees I had planted. One boy painted the willow gold instead of green. When I asked why, he said that sadness can shine too. I kept that drawing on my workbench. Letters from the youth program still came. Some of the kids I had mentored wrote to say they had found apartments, or jobs, or peace. A girl named Kayla sent a picture of her graduation cap with a single phrase painted on top. Paperwork, patience, boundaries, silence. She said it was her survival checklist. I pinned the photo beside the picture of Mark's glove. It felt like proof that the story had moved beyond me. The boy I had taken fishing wrote from another city. He said he was studying social work. He asked if revenge ever stops echoing. I told him the echo fades when you stop calling back to it. He replied with a single word, "Understood." Every now and then, an ache would surface without warning. A smell, a phrase, a sound too close to an old memory. The difference now was that I did not fight it. I let it pass through. Pain, when allowed to move, loses its sharpness. I learned that from the lake. Throw a stone and the ripples look violent, but they smooth themselves if you stop watching. One late summer night, lightning split the sky and rain came down hard enough to drum the roof. The power flickered. I sat by the window and listened to thunder roll across the hills. The storm made the lake shimmer with small bursts of light. I thought about the house where storms used to mean fear. Doors slammed, voices rose, small bodies hit. Now thunder was only weather. That realization felt like grace. When the storm ended, I walked outside barefoot. The ground was warm and wet. I looked up and whispered thanks, not to anyone, just to the air for being calm again. That night, I slept through till morning. The next day, I opened the shop early. An elderly woman came in carrying a cracked photograph frame. The radio inside the frame had stopped playing. She said it was the last thing her husband built before he died. I told her I would try. When she returned a week later, I played the tune that was stored in the device. She cried quietly, then smiled and said, "You brought him back for a minute." After she left, I sat alone and realized that restoring small sounds was all I ever wanted to do. Make the world hum where it had gone silent, be why autumn the trees by the lake had grown tall enough to cast real shade. I built a bench under the oak. On weekends, my wife and I sat there and read. Sometimes we said nothing for an hour. Silence had changed meaning again. It was no longer the absence of care, but the evidence of safety that we talked about adopting. I felt the old panic rise, the fear of becoming her. My wife squeezed my hand and said, "You already broke the pattern." I believed her. We started the paperwork, slow and steady. The counselor who interviewed us asked why we wanted a child. I said because I finally have a home to invite someone into. That was the truest sentence I had spoken in years. Winter returned, and I hung lights along the eaves. Snow fell in sheets that muffled the world. The house looked like a lantern in a field of white. Inside, everything smelled of cinnamon and wood polish. My wife played old records while I repaired a turntable for a customer. The song crackled and filled the room. We danced, awkward and laughing, and for a moment I saw every version of myself. The boy under the bookshelf, the teenager on the porch swing, the man at the courthouse, and they all seemed to nod at each other as if to say, "We made it." On the anniversary of Grandma's passing, I visited the nursing home where she had lived. The staff still remembered her. They told me the choir she started was still performing. I sat in the back during rehearsal. The singers' voices blended into a soft wave of harmony that carried every word she used to say, "Keep your promise." I left a small bouquet by the door and whispered, still keeping it. When spring came again, I received a letter from the county, the same office that once handled my mother's case. It was a generic notice about a memorial event for unclaimed residents. They were placing a plaque with names too faded to read. I almost ignored it, then decided to attend. The ceremony was brief. A few people from shelters, a few from churches, one tired official reading names. I stood at the back. The list included hers. I felt the old tightness in my chest, but this time it eased quickly. I did not cry. I did not smile. I simply breathed. When the service ended, I placed a single wildflower on the ground. Not forgiveness, not love, just acknowledgement. Then I walked away. Back home, the sky was clear. I sat on the dock until stars came out. The water held the reflection of every light, like memory holding moments, bright, brief, endless. I thought of all the lives that had touched mine, for better and worse, and I realized the story was not about punishment or even survival anymore. It was about continuity, about what remains when everything noisy has burned away. I'll end where I began, with truth spoken aloud. My name is Marcus Reed. I am 32 years old, still alive, still learning. I found my way out, and if you're listening, you can too. The quiet you're afraid of is not empty. It's waiting for you to fill it with something honest. Breathe. Begin again. Peace is not a miracle. It's maintenance. Do it every day,